Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Person You Want to Be. I am your host, Eric Teplitz. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to pose my first question rhetorically to you, the listener. Have you ever encountered an author who so resonates with you, who so beautifully captures in words the things that you care about and the issues that you wrestle with? An author who intrigues you, challenges you, provokes you, entertains you, delights you, informs you, and inspires you, all just through the way they organize words on a page. That's a question mark at the end of that. Well, today I am super excited to be speaking with someone who meets that description for me. His name is Gregg Levoy. Gregg Levoy is the author of Callings, Finding and Following an Authentic Life, rated among the top 20 career publications by the Workforce Information Group. And I might add, one of my all-time favorite books. And he is the author of the nearly 500 pages long magnum opus, Vital Signs, The Nature and Nurture of Passion. He is also the former behavioral specialist at USA Today, a regular blogger for Psychology Today, and has appeared on ABC TV, CNN, NPR, and PBS, FYI. Gregg is a former adjunct professor of journalism at the University of New Mexico and former columnist and reporter for USA Today and the Cincinnati Enquirer. It is my great privilege to have him here with me. Gregg Levoy, welcome to The Person You Want to Be.
Thank you, Eric. I'm delighted to be here. Really.
It's so cool to see you again after it's been about 8 years or so. I'd like to start off these interviews by posing this question. I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about the environment in which you grew up. And what I'm really curious to know is specifically the first inklings that you can recall as a child of who it was you were, who it was you wanted to be, in whatever way, shape, or form that might look. It could be completely fanciful and fantasy driven. That's fine.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So I'm just going to shoot from the hip. This is what pops into my mind. I grew up in New York. I was born in the city, and I think of my father when I think of the work that I do now, and he was at heart a scientist. It's not what he became. He went into the family business that stretched back 50 years before he even got into the picture. And he left the science behind. He was a chemist, although he did come to show and tell with us and do his science there. But he had his favorite game to play with me and my two brothers all the while we were growing up was something he invented called the alien game. And the way this worked is he was an alien from another planet, and which we had suspected all along. And we were his guides on Earth. So we would go out into the neighborhood or into the city or down by the shore or whatever, and he would ask questions about the planet that he saw, and we had to try to explain it to him as the Earthlings. So this was a fabulous teaching tool. And it was all about asking questions. And this has been my MO for most of my career. I was a journalist, so I literally paid the rent by asking questions. As a teacher, that's my primary method, is asking people lots of, as you know, nosy personal questions to try to help them sort of connect dots and figure out what their callings are. But that, to me, really captured the atmosphere that I grew up in, was this very inquisitive, scientifically oriented worldview. But it really showed me the power of questions.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So then you were a natural questioner. Your curiosity was certainly encouraged. But did you have any leanings aside from just general curiosity about life, about the world? Were there any kind of leanings that you felt drawn toward very naturally?
Yeah. It was the arena my father was not particularly adept at, which was the inner world.
Hmm.
Okay. So my questions often had a lot to do with the inner life. And my dad wasn't particularly adept at that, nor were most of the men in his generation,
Hmm.
frankly, right? But that was my leaning. It was what makes me tick, what makes people tick, what are people thinking and feeling? Because in a sense, I grew up with with a stethoscope up to the walls in the house where I grew up, because nobody would talk about inner life stuff. Nobody would talk about what they were really feeling. And so I leaned in that direction, and I wanted to know all those questions. And my parents didn't like me asking them.
Hmm.
And they didn't want to answer the questions, which I think is one of the reasons I majored in communications, because journalism turns out to be a career where you ask questions, and if they don't want to answer them, you get to say that they declined to comment, which, as everybody knows, means they're guilty of something. So, but there was something to that. There was definitely a thread in my work life that had a lot to do with the importance of wanting to know what was going on around me that nobody would talk about. For instance, why my parents divorced at 9. They never they never answered the questions that we had, I especially. And so there's something about the need to dig down into what's really going on under the surface.
Hmm.
And callings and passions and the kind of things that I'm interested in are all about those kind of listening in, right?
It's a wonderful image of little Greg with a stethoscope up against the wall that was trying to overhear, I'm guessing, conversations that weren't meant for your ears.
That's right. And I also mean it metaphorically. It's just like there's something really important to me about listening in. I feel it's almost a kind of security in life to listen down deep. Not just what people are saying on the surface, not what just is going on the surface, but what's going on underneath it. And that's just been a really important part of managing life for me, to say nothing of becoming the person I want to be.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a scene from the movie Annie Hall where Woody Allen and Diane Keaton are having a conversation on a rooftop, making sort of small talk, completely inane conversation. And then there's the translation underneath of what they're actually thinking.
That's right.
The subtext, what's going on underneath.
Yeah, and it reminds me, remember Mad Magazine?
Mm-hmm.
From when we were kids? There was this thing called the shadow nose. And so we would show what people are doing, acting out on the surface, but then the shadow, literally the shadow on the wall behind them, would show what they were really feeling or really thinking. And I'm after that material, not just for gossip and curiosity's sake, but because it's just essential to making our way through life, is to just really listen down deep. What's going on, for starters, in here?
Yeah, and we're kind of conditioned and trained oftentimes to ignore that. That's why I think your work and your books are so meaningful each time I go back to them, because I'm reminded of how much this is not the way that our culture encourages us to be that sort of probing and inquisitive about our internal lives. Right. And there's so much rich material there that is because it's running the show. So whether we're aware of it or not, and whether we're on good terms with it or not. And so the more you realize that, the more you realize the importance of doing exactly what you're talking about, and probing and getting to know what's going on underneath things. I'm wondering, you mentioned 2 brothers, and I happen to know that one of those is a twin brother, Ross, right?
Right.
And this is fascinating to me because I love to speculate about unanswerable questions. It's just like one of my personal favorite things to do.
Yeah.
And so there's the impossible to answer nature and nurture question, or argument as it's presented. And so you grow up with a twin brother, obviously same household, same parents, same divorce at age 9. And I'm wondering to what extent your brother Ross had these same kind of inclinations that you did, or maybe perhaps didn't. And if, and then how that maybe informs your own perspective on the nature nurture question.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, by and large, I think it's fair to say, and I think he'd probably agree, he did not have the same level of inquisitiveness around the emotional and psychological realms that I did and that I do. It's just, I think we're wired differently. Nor does my older brother. He's a scientist as well. But all of his inquiries are toward how things work. Yeah, Ross and I are really different that way. We have very different levels of interest in what's going on under the surface, because frankly, as I'm sure you know personally, what's going on under the surface is not always convenient or comfortable, and maybe greatly at odds with what we're doing, day to day, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, for instance. And so it's a little bit of Pandora's box to lift that lid and go down in there and muck around and ask all of our questions. How do I really feel? What do I really want to say? What is my heart's desire? I think Teplitz, do I have this right? This is a Jewish name?
Teplitz, yeah.
Yeah, Teplitz, sorry. I've got a friend named Teplitsky. That's why I put the accent on that.
Yeah, but, that was my grandfather's name, and he shortened it. Yeah, so he was a Teplitsky and shortened it to Teplitz.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
How interesting. Well, I was a Levy, and my grandfather added the O to disguise the fact that we were Jewish.
Right.
But it gave me the Oi in Levoy. So, so there's certain benefits to it. But the reason I mentioned that is because the Torah, right, which is, the first 5 books, I guess, of the Old Testament, there's a list of 613 laws in there. And one of them is follow not the whims of your own heart.
Wow.
Which would put you and me out of business.
Yeah.
There's so many of these rules and regulations about how to live that really bear questioning. The whims of your heart can put you at odds with your own self.
Sure.
What about the part of you that wants to follow security and the part of you that wants to follow passion? Those two have to be brought together to hammer out a treaty that's going to serve both of them, rather than stuffing one or the other under the floorboards just to get rid of the tension. But what does passion inform you that you need to do with your life, or who you are, compared to what your parents may want you to do, or your culture, or your gender?
I have to wonder, I know that you've done callings workshops for many years, and I attended one of those some years back. I have to think that for some people, drudging this stuff up might get ugly, and might get maybe even, maybe ugly isn't the best word, but very emotional. Have you had any, do you recall any particular experiences maybe with someone in one of your workshops having a profound reaction to the kinds of questions that you ask?
Yes. And frankly, ugly is not it, because it's scary when you realize that who you really are and what you feel maybe you were put here to do is greatly at odds with what you're actually doing with the precious and ever diminishing time in your life. It is very scary. There was a woman, to actually answer your question, there was a woman who came to one of my workshops in Oregon years ago, who spent most of the workshop literally sitting on a chair on the threshold of the door. 2 legs of the chair were inside the classroom and 2 legs of the chair were outside the classroom. She literally half in and half out.
Wow.
And, what we're torn. We're torn between passion and security. We're torn between what honoring thy mother and thy father, for instance, and doing what our callings are. There's lots of ways that in fact, I think I've heard this described. Neurosis is the consequence of the cultural messages coming up against the heart's desire that tear you in two. That neurosis is, it's not just like OCD type of behavior or things that we associate with neurotic behavior, but it's the tearing between authenticity to ourselves and honoring culture and tribe and parents and rules that make societies tend to work, but the tear between the two. So this is why somebody once said to me, Greg, you need to learn how to manage paradox better. Meaning holding the tension between two seemingly opposing forces like that without splitting down the middle and hurling your cookies.
Well, that's not fair to single you out. Doesn't everyone have to get better at that?
Yes. He was just somebody who was one of my mentors who just knew that I, at that point, tended to be toward black and white thinking. And paradox doesn't lend itself to that. You need to hold that you both love and honor your parents and you rebel against them at the same time. You both love money and you resent it because it costs too much.
You know, that reminds me of a quote that I just encountered recently, and I have it right in front of me. And that quote is by someone I have never heard of before, Prensha Hemphill. This is the quote: "Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously."
Oh, wow. Yeah, there's one of those wonderful paradoxical equations, isn't it?
And it's about making room for both. It's like, I love you and I honor you, and I want to do right by you, and I also very much need to do the same for myself.
Exactly. So this is one of the reasons why I'm a really big believer in dialogue in any arena. Take those two forces, whatever two opposing forces in your life are, passion and security, me and mom, head and heart, whatever, anything that seems like it, there's a conflict there, and type out a dialogue between the two. Literally just put the two names, whatever they happen to be, at the top of the page, and you're just essentially doing a screenplay, conversation between two characters in a play, and you just don't take your fingers off the keyboard for a half an hour. Let those two voices talk to one another on the page, and it's fascinating what comes out of that conversation.
Wow. I can't help but think of the current political climate and how polarized it is. And so I'm wondering, can these conversations be productive, or how have you witnessed them be productive?
Well, I just ran across an organization called Braver Angels. Have you heard of this?
I think by poking around on your website, I came across it. Is that possible?
That could be. The fellow who started that might be a fascinating podcast for you, by the way.
What's that person's name?
No, I don't remember, but
okay.
Braver Angels.
I'll look it up.
But this is an organization that brings people together from very different sides of the political spectrum in a room, highly facilitated, as you might imagine. And they let them tell their stories about how they came to the belief systems they have, or they let them tell you the stereotypes they have of the other side. Literally, what are Democrats' stereotypes of Republicans and vice versa? And then they bring them together in the room to share their stereotypes, to say, well, which ones are true, which ones are not, how true are they? And they're now doing it apparently in the unhallowed halls of Congress. So they've actually managed to get in at that level, but it's conversations between two very opposing forces.
Those are some brave angels that are going to do that.
No kidding.
That's a fascinating. I'm definitely going to probe further into that. It sounds really cool. Yeah. So, you were a naturally curious questioner, prober, especially of the inner life and what was happening underneath the external reality. And there are a lot of ways in which that might manifest. I could imagine, for instance, you could become, something of a, counselor, which in ways you are. You could become almost like a shaman, or therapist, and writing, you a journalist or a writer. So I'm wondering, when your fascination with specifically the written word came, started becoming a thing, and And if you could tell us a little bit about that journey, because your writing is damn powerful, and I'm very just interested to hear how it took shape.
Yeah, wow. That would have started in junior high school. I remember being on the staff of the literary magazine and I was supposed to be educated in, you got to put this in quotes, good writing versus bad writing.
Mm-hmm.
I think more important than anything is writing for the sake of self-discovery. That if that's your criteria, good and bad are meaningless. And I think that it's important, if you're going to do art or any kind of writing, is to have that as your primary objective, is authenticity, is discovery. But I did learn the difference between good and bad writing, which is one of the reasons I didn't last long actually as a professor of journalism. This may sound terribly crass, but life is too short to read really bad writing. And
it doesn't sound crass at all.
Lot of it. There's a lot of it as a teacher or a professor.
Yeah.
But I also, in high school, I had an English teacher, one of those witnesses, one of those people who really sees you or sees your gift, may or may not even be a parent for that matter. And this was Mrs. Linder, who chopped up her students to tinder. Something we wrote about her, one of the students wrote about her, but she was the first person who saw the gift in me. This is high school, who saw the gift of writing and encouraged it. And that was probably the beginning of my interest. When you get somebody who's in a position of authority relative to you, telling you that you're good at something, you listen. And then in college, I had a journalism professor who did the same thing for me. She saw my gift. She really encouraged it. She put me on the staff of the college newspaper, which I eventually became an editor of and then worked for newspapers. But something critical about having people who witnessed you in whatever your gifts are. Does this sound familiar to you? Have you had a couple of people in the course of your life who did that for you?
Yeah, and certainly I think, we almost all of us have had a teacher that if they didn't give us that specific gift, which really is a gift, they inspired us in some way.
Yeah.
I've had teachers who awakened dormant interests I didn't even realize I had, and maybe that's similar to what you experienced.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So with writing, it wasn't something you really had a natural propensity for or interest. I should say, you weren't naturally interested on your own. It wasn't like something you would do on your own out of just the joy of it, or it wasn't until you had these adult figures that said, "Hey, you're really good at this."
Yeah,
before you gave it its due.
Yeah, mostly. I was writing poetry, as perhaps a lot of adolescents do, and it was let's say adolescent quality poetry,
right?
By and large. Miss Gorman notwithstanding, the woman.
Yeah, she's unbelievable.
Right,
Amanda Gorman. Yeah. Oh wow.
Right. So, what's her first name?
Amanda.
That's right. But I was writing poetry for a while, and then the English teacher, we had a regular assignment to keep a journal and hand it in every week. So this is kind of like sharing your diary.
Yeah. Yeah. I had to do that too.
Whoa, that was really intense to do. But it was a combination of a budding interest in communication. Can I communicate my ideas and my thoughts in a way that's not only authentic but interesting to readers? And then that with the teachers who inspired it. And my dad, when I headed off to college, I remember one of the things he said to me was, "Don't take courses, Gregg. Take professors."
Wonderful. Yeah. Did you have any, I'm wondering, sort of early successes with communicating your thoughts and ideas that, in addition to the encouragement, did you have any moments or sort of defining moments where either you gave a speech or somehow your writing was public and received in a way that made you feel, like you get a taste of that kind of a validation and you're like, oh, I want more of this?
Oh yeah, that was really clear. That was the journalism class in college. Up until that point, I had majored in changing majors, really.
Right.
And but when I landed on this one course, it was literally called How to Run a College Newspaper, which might have been the college's way of actually staffing the thing. But
By the way, where was college? Where did you go?
oh, well, that particular college was New England College in New Hampshire. But I went to 4 different schools in this country.
Whoa.
I went to a handful abroad.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's that nomadic streak I was talking about. It must have kicked in pretty early. But this class, the second I landed in journalism, the light just went on. It just went on because it allowed me to exercise my natural curiosity, my inquisitiveness. And it made it so people had to talk to me. Whereas, like I said, my parents wouldn't generally entertain a lot of the kind of questions I had. As a journalist, everybody has to. And everybody wants to. I mean, people love to be interviewed, as you've no doubt discovered as a podcaster. So I realized I get to exercise my natural inquisitiveness. I get to communicate my thoughts, and I get to have influence. People in media have some influence. And that was very exciting to me. I got to see my words in print, my ideas in print, to say nothing of my byline in print. Even though the very first byline I ever got
misspelled your name.
Wrong. They spell my name wrong.
Yeah, I recently dug out a little book called This Business of Writing.
Oh my God.
And so I just recently read that story.
Yeah. Meg Lewis.
So, okay, to back up for those who probably aren't familiar with This Business of Writing, this was your first published book, correct?
Yes.
And I'm very interested to find out how that came to be. I know it was published by Writer's Digest.
Yeah.
And I also I found it remarkable that this was published in 1992. And some of their publications had a profound effect on me. In particular, I'm thinking of a book, I believe it was called The Musicians and Songwriters Guide to Nashville by Sherry Bond, published by Writer's Digest, which sent me to Nashville, essentially. Okay. Yeah, but that's, I was very familiar with Writer's Digest, but when I think about Writer's Digest, I think about the annual publication that they put out, the Writer's Market, right? Yeah. And so those books were out of date by the time they were printed, basically, often in a lot of cases. No?
True, that is true.
So I was surprised when I picked up this old copy of your book from 1992, how startlingly relevant it still was, because you're not just writing about, you need to, send a query letter to such and such, and like you're writing about the psychological aspects of what is involved in declaring yourself a writer, and specifically in transitioning into a full-time freelance writer, and the themes and the demons that you have to wrestle with, and all of that still struck me as, exceedingly relevant. And it also seemed to me that there were some seedlings in that book of callings, but I'm jumping all over the place. So let's go back to, you've graduated college with a degree in journalism, correct?
Yes.
And you got yourself a gig pretty quickly. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I actually took the bulk of my senior year as an intern. And in retrospect, I'm a huge fan of internships, meaning actual boots on the ground experience in the field you're thinking you want to major in and make a career out of. And it was spent at Writer's Digest magazine. So I went to Cincinnati. I bought a car, and the money I would have spent on, college that semester, I spent on an apartment and a used car. And I became their intern. So I got into the publishing world right at the bottom floor. So I learned how a magazine is put together. And because they accepted freelance submissions, I learned a lot from an editorial point of view about what it's like being a writer and what works for editors, so that years later, when I became a freelancer, I knew what I was doing. And getting the book, by the way, I think largely came because the editor at Writer's Digest at the time I was there as an intern was John Brady. And he helped to steer, I think, Writer's Digest to me when they were thinking of a book on freelance writing.
How about that?
Yeah, so the mentorships have been critical to the road I've been on in my life. I'm just a really big believer in cultivating relationships with people who see your gift, appreciate what you're doing, and want to help and to reach out and create mentoring relationships. Although I don't know, I remember John said a number of things to me over the years that um, that were more like tormentoring than
I love that. That's
mentoring,
great.
you know, just challenging me. You know, at one point after 5 years of being a freelance writer, he said, "So you've made the trip to New York, right?" "The trip to New York?" "Yeah, to visit all your editors." "No." He goes, "Gregg, what are you waiting for? You need to cultivate these relationships in person. You need to go there and pitch them stories, even if they give you 5 minutes, which some of them did. You don't be a chicken." So he would challenge me, and that's what I mean.
That's
Kind of
great.
by tormentoring
Yeah.
is somebody who's not afraid to make fun of the king.
Yeah, but also prodding you in a helpful direction, not doing it just for the sake of quote tormenting you,
Yeah,
tormentoring.
uh,
But yeah, I mean
yeah,
that
pushing me.
those are so one theme that I see coming up time and again, with living an authentic life, as your book is subtitled, is the relationship between authenticity and courage.
Mhm.
Courage. What Talk a little bit about that, if you would, either from personal experience or even just observation.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm struck by the fact that the word courage comes from the French word for heart. You've run across this.
Yes. Oh, yes.
That's really significant because when we think of courage, we tend to use different body parts, shall we say, than
Right.
we talk about backbone and balls and
Yeah.
nerves and guts, and
Yeah.
it's heart. And that's a really important reframe for people, that courage is about heart and what does your heart want.
Hmm.
Um, and so heart and authenticity are really closely related in my experience. Um, it's like, who am I? What do I need to say to the world? What is that beautiful phrase from the theologian Frederick Buchner? Find the place where your deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger. And I love that. Your deep gladness means your heart, your soul, your passion, your intensity. Where does that meet a place where the world is hungry and in need? And I just love that sweet spot right there.
It's so interesting because you're right. When most people think about courage, they think about bravery, and
Right.
they think about overcoming fear, but not necessarily, right? In fact, I remember someone telling me they thought, "Oh my God, you were so brave to do such and such." And I honestly, that wasn't my experience of it. It was like, no, that was exactly what I wanted to do. It didn't feel like it took courage, but in the sense of bravery.
Yeah.
I was just following my heart, and it was the natural thing to do, which in that case, in that point in time, was to just throw all my stuff in a duffel bag and take a Greyhound bus down to Nashville.
Wow.
With my guitar in a duffel bag. And it didn't honestly, it didn't feel like, from the outside, people looking in said, "Wow, that must have taken so much courage." It didn't, or it took courage in the heart, in the sense of, yes, I was following my heart, but I didn't have, I think where the bravery part comes in is when what your heart is telling you is in conflict with either what your head is telling you or what society is telling you. Then it requires bravery to be courageous, bravery to follow your heart.
And to let go of things in order to move forward. You may have to let go of a job or the security of a regular paycheck or other people's approval.
Yeah,
I mean, there's lots of security, right? And other people's approval is one of them. But to let go of the status quo, or, somebody once said to me, let go of who you are for who you need to become.
Beautiful.
That's easy to put on a poster and snap on a wall. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a whole other matter to actually do that.
So I want to ask you about, we talk about the sort of potential conflicts between the head and the heart.
Yeah.
And, maybe our rational minds and our deep, heartfelt desires. I'm going to read a quote from your book, Vital Signs.
Oh.
Now, I was looking for quotes to pull out to, because here I am talking up a storm about your writing, and people are probably curious to hear something like, okay, let's see what this guy's made of here. But what was interesting is that I really had trouble pulling things out of callings without just taking the whole chapter with them. So I would encourage people, but just to give you a taste, to give the audience a taste, and also to set up the next question, I want to read this passage from your book, Vital Signs. Here it goes. No matter how firmly barnacled we are to the civilized life, the urban, rational, linear life, and to rigidities, moral, mental, physical, or sexual, our language alone gives away the depth of our identification with wildness. We speak of fertile imaginations, streams of consciousness, budding geniuses, webs of life, waves of emotion, oceans of sorrow, winds of war, dark nights of the soul, seeds of change, dirty minds, soiled garments, family trees, shell games, brainstorms, a wing and a prayer, and a ground of being. All this metaphoric talk. And a metaphor has but a single purpose: to establish unity. This is that. Life is a web. Consciousness is a stream. Ground is being. Not bad, right?
Yeah.
You had to have been a fan of George Carlin, no?
George Carlin. I was a fan of George Carlin. Yeah. And in fact, whenever people mistake me for some celebrity, him.
That's funny. Yeah, just his love of language and how beautifully he was able to dissect it and show ourselves to us through the language that we use.
Yeah.
And that is a very revelatory passage. And so in addition to just being fun to listen to, I think it really speaks to our connection with nature and to things that are perhaps out of our control, that wildness, that we are a part of nature. We are animals. We're not separate from it. And this can bring out, I think, inevitable conflicts with living in a, quote, civilized, unquote, society, right? So I'm wondering, I remember hearing a story that you told that involved playing cards. And this story, the way you had put it, kind of obliterated your rationalist view of the universe. Yeah. Could you tell us that story, and then and we'll go from there?
Yeah, because it's really a good story of how wild and surprising the world that we live in is, despite that we live a, quote, civilized life. It really showed me some of the wild elements in life and that I needed to open up to it. So I was trying to figure out whether to quit my job at the newspaper and become a freelance writer full time. And I was driving home from work one afternoon, listening to the Eagles song, Desperado. So most people know the song. There's a line in there that says, "Don't you draw the queen of diamonds, she'll beat you if she's able. The queen of hearts is always your best bet." Right there, I pulled up to my house. So I turned off the car and the song, opened the car door, and stepped my left foot out onto the curb. And right at my left foot was a playing card, which I turned over, and it was the queen of hearts. So this falls into the category of what Carl Jung called synchronicities. So meaningful coincidences, and over the next 2 years, while I tried to figure out what to make of this call to be self-employed as a writer, I found 4 more queen cards all over the country, not just in Cincinnati where I was at the time, but all over the country, including a wilderness called Maroon Bells in near Aspen, Colorado. Out in the middle of nowhere, like miles from the nearest trail.
Like a single card, just
a single card, queen card. and which had apparently been there for a really long time. I mean, I was thinking of having that thing carbon dated, I swear. It looked like it had been up there for years, maybe even decades. And
Queen of Hearts, or they were different?
No, they were all different suits.
Yeah.
They were all different suits, and I had one of each. And but they were all queens. And so, I just started Googling the archetype of the queen. What does the queen mean? It is the preeminent archetype of powerful feminine energy. So, you have to interpret this stuff the way you would like a dream or something. Yeah. And I just figured out that what this really kind of stunning series of synchronicities was trying to tell me was that I needed to apply the feminine mindset to this question about whether to quit my job, meaning heart, not head. Now, I realize that's a little bit plain and simple, but that's how it struck me at the time. The feminine principle would have said, go with your heart. The masculine principle was, you need a paycheck. So but again, what is orchestrating those kind of events? There's a quality of wildness to life that is profound and profoundly outside of my control or anybody's control.
Or understanding.
Or understanding, exactly. But I understood it at some gut level, which is really what it was about. It was about making gut decisions. So I just love that I had that experience, because it really cemented in my mind, oddly enough, how non-rational, I'm not going to say irrational, because, as I wrote about that story, this struck me as orchestrated by something with wits. There was intelligence to this, the fact that I kept finding only queen cards, and I've never found cards before or since, but here I have these 5 queens. So there's something to keep an eye out for in life in terms of guidance that doesn't just come from the frontal cortex.
Yeah. And, you talk about early on in callings, the importance of listening. It's really a beautifully early, or it might even be the first chapter, really, really beautiful listening, and the value of silence, and just tuning in and just kind of removing yourself from the noise that's around us everywhere all the time, so that we can actually hear what's calling us and tune into it. And your story strikes me in a certain way, like the sort of devil's advocate rationalist in me would say, okay, pure coincidence. But even still, if life is a Rorschach test, it's our responses to it and interpretations of it that indicate to us what matters to us. So even if that was pure, randomness,
right?
Your take on it was, in a sense, you could say your soul's way of making its wishes known
and making sense of it.
Right.
It seemed too orchestrated. I don't know how else to put it, to just be purely random. Certainly finding the 1 queen card after listening to the Desperado song,
that's
wild.
A little creepy.
Wow. But 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 queen cards over this period of time when I was trying to make this big life decision, that started to feel like pieces of a puzzle fitting together. It was hard for my rational brain to just sweep it to the side.
And was that rational brain like pretty dominant up to that point? Would you say?
Oh my God. Yeah. Absolutely. Like I said, I come from a scientific family, very left brain family, very money oriented New York Jewish family. But that was a phase of my life when I was starting to make some really profound shifts in that department. I was starting to explore alternative philosophies, reading Alan Watts, Krishnamurti, and listening into my dreams. That was a key practice that I've had my entire life.
Really?
Paying attention and giving great credence to my dreams.
How did you first start doing that?
I started just remembering them. And as a storyteller, you're thinking, well,
who writes this stuff?
yeah, that's right. Who writes this stuff? Because dreams come up with, my unconscious comes up with images and scenarios I couldn't imagine in my waking life in a million years.
I bet you David Lynch's dreams are probably just very straightforward, linear, boring narratives.
Yeah, right. And so as a storyteller, you look at dreams and you think, okay, so these are stories. My unconscious is essentially playwriting while I'm asleep. And I don't want to sleep through it. And then I started, I started reading books on dream interpretation. It was really clear that it was a way for the unconscious to help you work stuff out that you're trying to puzzle out in your conscious life. And the question to ask of dreams is, where does this look familiar from in my day-to-day life, and even just in the last few days? And it's amazing how often there's a correspondence between what I'm dreaming about and what I'm going through in life. And I think dreams have told me what I really know about something, really to the point when I have literally turned down work because of a dream. At one point, I was contacted by a couple of HBO executives to turn callings into a reality-based television show. And they flew me out to LA, wined me and dined me. And for God's sakes, they even took me clothes shopping.
Oh boy.
Which I thought was incredibly presumptuous. But I had a dream the night before I was supposed to sign on the dotted line of these two guys wearing costume jewelry, patent leather shoes, and I turned the job down because my dream was telling me, or my subconscious was telling me, I don't trust them. And I literally turned down the job based on a dream, and my hot-blooded capitalistic friends were like, "You did what? HBO, and you turned it down because of a dream?" But at that point, I had 20 years under my belt of trusting dreams and seeing how often their authority was smack on. And so that dream held a quality of authority I was able to trust.
Beautiful. And courage is what comes to mind in the sense of following your heart.
That's right. That's right.
However that might appear on the outside to your capitalist friends or even mom and dad, right?
Right. Yeah.
So callings, I'm sure that I'm not the only person that has told you how much this book has meant to them and impacted them. And it's a special book as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
And I know that you had a close call, like a near miss with one Oprah Winfrey. Could you tell us that story? Because an endorsement from Oprah Winfrey, still to this day, right, is a life changer. I feel pretty certain about. I can't speak from experience, but I think that I'm sure that a lot of people have felt like if Eric's book club meant anything to the world, callings would be essential reading. Unfortunately, that's not going to bring you much in the way of probably attention or money. But Oprah Winfrey. So what happened? Tell us about this moment.
This is one of those experiences that really throws you back on, why are you doing the work that you do? Why are you following your calling? Who's it for? Who are you serving? It really threw me back on that because it was one of life's great disappointments.
What year? Give us paint the scene.
When did this happen? It happened, I don't know, not even a year after Callings came out. So it would have been 1998. And I would have been living in Tucson, Arizona at the time. And her senior executive producer, called me and kept me on the phone for 45 minutes doing essentially an interview. And then a few days later, a second executive producer called me, did the same thing. And you
received two calls.
Yeah.
calls
Exactly.
from Oprah's people. Okay.
From Oprah's people. And I figured they're not going to spend that kind of time if they're not seriously interested in bringing me on the show. Turns out that's just standard procedure for them to check out whether there's a fit. Apparently there was not, because they never called back. And, you sit by the phone for weeks after that, and you never, you don't want to pick it up. You're afraid that it might be somebody else and you're going to miss the call. I mean, it was absurd what it triggered in terms of my ego. And the part of me that wanted to get rich and famous, but they never called, and week turned into month, turned into year. And I still don't really know why they never brought me on the show. But they did the same thing again, I don't know, maybe 3 years later.
You're kidding.
The same routine with the same book.
Now talk about tormenting.
Oh my Lord. It was, and once again, they didn't bring me on the show. And so, you're just left with wondering why, coming up with theories, tossing and turning at night, being angry at the world for not delivering you what you think you deserve. But like I said, it really threw me back on, it was one of those almost spiritual crises that really makes you question what you're doing and why you're doing it. And you watch yourself go through all the rationalizations, sour grapes, and I'm glad I never got on the show because it strengthened my soul. I mean, you tell yourself pretty much everything.
Yeah.
But it was just a profound disappointment. And you realize this is part of the program too.
How did you finally make peace with it? And what, if you have, I'm guessing you have, but I don't know that, but what, how have you interpreted it if you haven't, if not made peace with it all these years later? Because that, I think I can speak from my own experience. I'm sure other people have had analogous experiences, at least in terms of the magnitude of disappointment and maybe even the feeling of being betrayed or done wrong by life.
Yes.
In some way, like, you were true to your call, you were true to your gift, you did the work, you were loyal, you gave of yourself as like you gave it all.
Yeah.
And, and then, where's the reward? But so where are you at now with all of this?
Well, I've learned since then in a number of different ways, that there's a certain trust in the universe I need to have that supersedes all these, I did my part. Where's the universe? Why didn't it come through with the reward? You packed up a duffel bag, left your life, took a bus down to Nashville, probably worked it for a while, and then maybe decided it wasn't going to happen the way you wanted. How do you make peace with that? What do you tell yourself? Was it a false calling to begin with?
Right. You question your own motives too, right? Like, what was I in this for?
Joseph Campbell used to tell us about the hero's journey is, if you follow your bliss, you will have your bliss, but nothing else is guaranteed. Yeah. This fabulous book, Do What You Love, The Money Will Follow by Marcia Sinitar. Really good, grounded book. She never says when the money's going to follow or how much, or,
or in which lifetime. Yeah, right. I mean, look at all these artists throughout history, some of the most well-known people who, never got their due until they were long gone, right?
Exactly. And so there's this, it throws into high relief your expectations, my expectations. Yeah. Or if I do my part, the universe will meet me halfway. Says who?
Right.
It's a certain amount of wishful thinking. Maybe it gets people to try out their calling, but it's a setup. Expectations generally are, profanities waiting to happen. Because the world and the universe, you think of it that way, as in trust the universe, doesn't always come through the way you expect or the way you want. No. And ultimately, one of the conclusions I've come to about callings is they're really ultimately about service. They're not about payoffs.
Right. But still, though, wouldn't your book have served so many more people if that? Yeah. And so that is where part of the questioning comes in. I have I have my own version of that, not Oprah Winfrey, nothing like that, but just, as you kind of probably intuited, giving myself like mind, body, and soul year after year, wholeheartedly to music and not getting the return that I hoped for. Right. I didn't, and also I never expected, by the way, to stop pursuing it because it was such a singular passion and focus. Boy, yeah. It never even occurred to me that there would be a point in time that I would stop. I was basically forced to stop by my own, well-being or lack thereof. I was just took it hard on the chin, so to speak, metaphorically. Yeah. To such a disorienting and, it was like having the ground pulled up from under you and falling so hard and really just like questioning, being so wounded by it, that I questioned everything. But yeah, there is, yeah. Go ahead. So there is this, I think, belief, and I think our culture perpetuates it, and I think it's harmful, that, do what you love and the money will follow your bliss, and he doesn't say anything more than that, right? But the expectation, and Gregg, it's taken me 20 plus years to whittle this down to 3 words. I'll share them with you because maybe it'll mean something to you. I've been sharing them with people lately. This past year, I think, is when it crystallized what I've been trying to live by. 3 words: explorations over expectations. Wow. Yeah, I get that intuitively. Right. So say more about that. Yeah. So meaning the whole point, as far as I can tell, like, why are we here? Well, how are we different from other beings? Like, we're not the only animals that have intelligence. We're not the only animals that have emotions. Right. What distinguishes us? And I think that among the key things that distinguishes us from the rest of the animal kingdom, as far as we can tell anyway, is that we can consciously do things. We can consciously explore both our inner and outer worlds. We can do it with deliberation, with intent, and with consciousness. And we can also make choices that way, where we're not completely beholden. We have instincts like any other creatures, and we have drives like any other creatures, but we have this ability to pause, redirect, and make a choice about something before just reacting. It might be a split second, but it's there. And sometimes we have greater access to it than other times. Yeah. So I think that, and by the way, I'm not saying I've mastered this at all. I'm just saying that it occurs to me that the wise approach to life is to just do things for the exploration of them. That is the gift of life, that's what we get to do. We get to explore. We have a curiosity, we have a talent, we have an interest, we have a love, a passion, a joy. Yeah. We get to explore it, but we don't have any say beyond that. And the moment, and you will be, if you don't think you have expectations, or if you're not aware of them, they will be made aware to you in direct proportion to which you experience disappointment. Because disappointment, I think, is an indication of just how much expectation you had. I didn't realize the full extent of my. And I sat down a year ago and I made a timeline of my life, of all the growth spurts in my life, far back as I can remember. Every one of them was preceded and accompanied by upheaval, chaos, disappointments in a lot of cases. But that what I was after there was a nice little visual aid of how close in correspondence suffering and growth are. Yeah. And as a way to process the disappointments, for instance, or the losses, or the quote failures. Campbell called these things directive crises. Who is it? Gail Sheehy wrote the book Passages, calls it falling up. And it's really important just for your sanity when you have an experience like you did with music or I did with Oprah, just to really rest as much
as you can out of the experience, learn something, grow in some way, see that it's a falling up experience. You know, like what happened in the immediate aftermath of you coming back from Nashville?
Yeah. Well, worst year of my life is what happened.
Okay, yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's part of the falling.
Oh yeah. Dark night of the soul, you know,
Yeah.
to speak of that. But yeah, I would definitely see it in hindsight as a redirecting.
There you go.
So, and there are countless lessons. I've written about this to a fairly good extent in articles and on my blog and whatnot. And you know, because I very much was trying to make sense of it, because I felt like, wait a minute, like was this not a true call? Of course it was a true call, but I also realized there was such a mixture of motivations. And I think that that's okay. I was not at all, you know, some kind of like pure being. No, it was a mix of things. Did I love music? Absolutely. No question. Did I love what I was doing? You know, was I good at it? Well, you know, that's very subjective, isn't it? I feel like I was good enough at it, like, you know, and then you listen to the radio and you see what, like, you know, you see like there's no meritocracy. And what broke my heart equally on, by the way, was, you know, because I told you before this call, I am such a natural champion of people whose work I adore. And so when I witnessed friends and even, you know, acquaintances or even people I didn't know in Nashville whose talents I believed in, who I thought these people are as good as anyone out there. I mean, it's inarguable as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
And to watch them be overlooked, to watch them be ignored, to watch them be told, sorry, we don't know, we think you're great, we don't know how to sell you or whatever, like we don't know how to market, like to watch other people's dreams get crushed.
Yes.
When I thought that they were when I thought they were like the real deal, was equally hurtful. I really like, you know, and it just made me, you know, question, well, I don't understand. But going back to my own thing, like, I don't understand, like, what did I do wrong? Or what was their ego wrapped up in it? Well, hell yeah. Yeah. And were there, you know, desires of, you know, earthly success? Hell yeah. But that wasn't like, you know, I really honestly, like, I felt like I was trying to make a deal with life saying, look, I just want to eke out a living doing this. Anything more than that, I'll gladly accept. But just let me, like, you know, I will bust my ass. I will do everything I have to do. So I felt, you know, very confused for sure. Among the mixture of feelings. But to answer your question, what happened? Like, my life then went in so many unpredictable directions and took so many weaves in and out and all over the place. And it has made for a fascinating life story and series of adventures and plot twists that the younger version of me would never have been able to even imagine.
Right.
So, and, you know, ultimately, I probably did get what I wanted. Or I would say that what I mean is that, first of all, I got to explore my creativity. I got to do a lot of the things I wanted to do. I got to make an album, you know, and I got to do it the way I wanted. Because I couldn't get a record company's backing, I did it exactly the way I wanted. I'm guessing Callings probably was pretty damn close to exactly the way you wanted it to be, no? I mean, you didn't have,
despite the fact that it had a publisher.
Right. That's what I mean. Like, you weren't told, well, Greg, this chapter's too long, it's got to go.
No,
or
I
anything
didn't
like
have
that.
much of that.
Yeah. So, you know, I got to have these amazing experiences of performing and connecting with other people, with other musicians, with audiences. You know, I actually did succeed. I got to hear my songs played on the radio. Like, I got to do all the things I wanted. It just wasn't nearly the scale at which I had hoped for.
Right.
But like, I got to do the things. And also, I think, you know, one of the big drivers for me with a lot of creative folks in general is what they want more than anything, if you can sum it up in a word, is love. You want love.
Yeah.
Appreciate me. Love me. Right? Like, you're putting yourself out there. I mean, why would someone in their right mind get up on a stage and bare their soul in front of a room full of strangers? It's because, I'm not just saying this is the only reason, but often there is a desire to be seen and heard and
That's
loved as you are for who you are.
right.
And you know what? I found that. I got that in my wife. Like I
Wow.
got this amazing partner.
Right.
It took a while, by the way. I had
Yeah.
to go through quite a journey,
Yeah.
and
Right. I
but
remember when,
but isn't that interesting? Like in a sense, like I got my prayers in a sense were answered, just not in the way I had imagined them, not in
exactly.
the way I thought they should be.
Right. Right. And the fact that it shows up as a partner may be a better blessing and benediction than the anonymous crowd.
Yeah.
Well, the quote love of an anonymous crowd.
Right.
You know, I remember after the whole debacle with Oprah, my wife wrote, she was an artist, is an artist. She made a card, and it was an as is award. And she gave it to me, that you are acceptable and lovable
Wow.
as is, without anybody on the outside needing to give you a tip of the hat, you know, and it meant a lot to me at that time,
Sure.
you know, but I don't know. I'm also in a profession where I get to suffer creatively, not just neurotically. I get to write about, you know, you get to create a song about it or share it on a podcast. There's ways in which we can plow in these disappointing experiences in life and learn from them and explore them, and maybe even ultimately pay the bills with an article
Mm.
or something you might write about it. But also, you know, on the complete flip side of making peace with our disappointments, there's a book you probably remember from this business of writing. There's a book out there that I had on my shelf in between the thesaurus and the dictionary when I was a freelancer. It was Rotten Rejections
Oh, yes.
is the name of the book. And it's just this little compendium of famous literary kiss-offs in history, but from editors and publishers you know lived to regret
Yes.
turning down Anne Frank's book, or Herman Melville's book, Moby Dick. You know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the musical version of that, I don't know if you remember, there was a movie called The Ruddles that some of the members of Monty Python were a part of, and it was a spoof on the Beatles. And they were, interviewing the guy who turned down he was known as the guy who turned down the Ruddles, like the biggest act of all time. And they were just like rubbing it in his face. So how does it feel? How do you live with you? How is it when you go to bed at night? What's that like? Like just really like rubbing his face in it. It's pretty funny. So I'd love if you have some more, a little bit more time. I wanted to ask you a couple more things. I'm really interested, by the way, and just also to wrap that with a bow, that whole thing about, disappointments and expectations and all of that. I would say that for myself, one of the lessons learned was not to be so attached to the way in which your needs in life are met, or your desires are met, because we are so limiting and self-limiting like I had convinced myself this is the only way I am ever going to be happy. I'm ever going to be satisfied with my life is if, so I was asking for it. I was asking for it. And so I think it helps to realize that we are, as Walt Whitman put it, right? Like, we're complex. What was Leaves of Grass? What does he say? Do you remember that poem? He basically says, you can't contain me. I'm not, I
contain multitudes.
Yeah, I contain multitudes. And I think that we often discount ourselves and the ways in which we have gifts, and the ways in which these might be realized and bring us satisfaction. So in other words, I think one of the key things with me, as much as I love music and performing and all, I think the writing is a huge piece of it. And music is not the only outlet for that, just as an example.
Yes.
So I think that it's important to make room for, the ways in which our calls may be answered. And maybe we're not listening because we're so, rigid about how they're supposed to manifest. I love this book, Calling. So I have to ask you what the process was. How did this book come to be? What was the, like the germ of it, or the seed of it, as far back as you can trace? And then how did it turn into this finished thing? What was the process of it?
Yeah. Actually, the book started off as what I thought was going to be my second book for Writer's Digest books after this business of writing, which was, I think I was working title was something like Your True Voice. And it was about how to find your true voice, your true material, your true subject matter, your true form. But it was about that subject. And I wrote it for 6 months, and I kept kind of hitting a brick wall. And it was only when I let go of it that I realized it's about the true voice for everybody. And that's when it became Callings.
So was that like a book you were assigned to write or given in advance for? Oh, okay.
No, they said, do you have another one?
Right.
And to have a publisher say, do you have another one? It's like, yeah, give me a minute. I'll get right back to you.
Yeah.
But it didn't want to be the book I thought I wanted to write for Writer's Digest.
Isn't that interesting?
I wanted to be bigger, and I kept hitting dead ends until I let it go and realized it was bigger than for writers. It was about authenticity for everybody. How do you find an authentic life? How do you create a life that really belongs to you and isn't a knockoff or a hand-me-down? Or but the actual process is just sitting my butt down in a chair for 2 years, just writing and researching and interviewing. It was just the mechanics.
I love how you incorporate, there's the journalist in there who tells other people's stories of finding their callings and answering, or, answering their callings and how they manifested. And there's a degree of self-revelation and personal stories in there.
That's right.
There are the amount, you must be quite a reader, because the amount of sources that you cite, and they're so beautiful, the people you quote, and one of the best things about a Gregg Levoy book, and of which I hope there eventually are more, is reading the bibliography and getting ideas for other books to read, because man, do you do your homework.
Yeah. And a subject like Callings, is so much written about it. And I want to bring in what spirituality says about it, what science says about it, what philosophy says about it, what the arts say about it. There was just a ton of research to do, which was thrilling to me. When I became a writer in the first couple of years, I remember my brother, I was describing the process of researching books, and my brother said, so you essentially do homework for a living.
Right. It's so interesting. One person's, bliss is another person's torture.
Nightmare,
right.
Exactly.
I actually do have a quote in front of me from the book that feels relevant. You say, "We don't say yes to a call once and only once. In most cases, we must renew our commitment regularly, lest it be overtaken. We have to keep coming back to the task, knowing that the only thing scarier than showing up is not showing up."
Yeah. Yep. See, that to me is one of the missing links in the whole process of, almost any kind of creativity or calling, is patience. I can't remember who's he lives down in LA. So writer for the LA Weekly. He's kind of famous. Anyway, he talks about the talent of the room.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. I know. I don't remember his name, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. The talent of the room means forget about, your literary skills or your contacts. You need to have the talent of the room, the willingness to sit alone in a chair in a room and write. And that's a lot of what
in chair.
Yeah, right. But just the patience to kind of abide by the growing seasons and the learning process, and not be impatient. Like, got to have it now, got to have it delivered kind of mentality. The creative world doesn't operate that way, I think.
That is a lifelong lesson. I have said elsewhere that, one of the things you mentioned in the book Callings, when you are you approach it from so many different angles, and you say that one indication of a calling is a lesson that you keep repeatedly needing to learn over and over again. But life just keeps trying to say, you haven't learned this yet. And it gives you the same, like the Groundhog Day experience. And I have noticed that for me, there are 3 biggies in that realm, just speaking very broadly. The first being patience, the first being learning patience. The second being, as per what we were discussing a little earlier, detachment from results. Good luck with that one, human beings. But still, you can make progress at that. You really can.
Yes.
Hard though, right?
Very.
And then the last one is ultimately trusting life.
Right.
Trusting the universe. Is this a safe place that we live in? Is it it's a big one.
Yeah, I remember somebody. I'm not entirely sure if this is an apocryphal story or not, but there's a story about somebody interviewing Albert Einstein and saying, of all the questions you've posed into the mysteries of the universe, Mr. Einstein, what do you think is the most important question to ask? And Albert Einstein reportedly said, is the universe a friendly place or not? And whether he actually said that or not, it's a great question. Because do you believe the universe is essentially benevolent, indifferent, malevolent? That's going to determine how your life unfolds, a belief like that.
Sure. And I think, a similar quote attributed to him has to do with, you can see everything in life as a miracle, or nothing in life as a miracle. Something along, I'm butchering it a little bit, but it's a similar kind of, it's like your orientation toward life is going to, is going to basically like determine the kind of experience that you have.
Yeah. And one of mine is, what can I learn from this? I'm almost obsessive about getting something out of all the different experiences, from joy to misery. There are stories in there. There's learning in there. There's service. I can work through this to some degree, and then, turn around and offer a hand to the next guy down the line.
Yeah. There's a great quote from Garrison Keillor, one of my favorites. He said, nothing bad ever happens to a writer. It's all material.
It's all grist for the mill, which has been very true in my case.
Yeah. Gregg, thank you so much for this conversation. I knew it was going to be like just so much fun, and I could talk to you for hours and hours.
Well, that's great.
I do have a last question here for you. And I just want to make sure that I am not missing. Let's see here. Okay, I think I basically covered what I wanted. So my last question to you is just, at this moment in time, at this, in this phase of your life, what is calling to you? And the way that I would word it to be in line with the name of the show is, who is the person you are wanting to be now and going forward at this stage of the game? It's a little question.
Yeah. Well, okay. So what's popping into my mind is, I've been studying recently something called authentic relating. And it's apparently, I don't know, a movement is probably overstating it. A fad is certainly understating it. But it's this set of skills that really help us listen to one another deeply, and really come in handy for conflict resolution. So you're working with issues of defensiveness, you're working with issues of self-focus, and learning how to really listen and draw other people out and be responsive rather than reactive, and really learn to get into each other's world. And it's kind of a set of skills. I've been studying the hell out of that lately.
And Braver Angels might be in line with that.
Yeah,
right?
and nonviolent communication.
Marshall
Rosenberg's work.
Right.
What's called circling work. I'm in a circling group at the moment, but they're all helping educate me in how to really listen deeply to other people, especially when you're triggered. Okay. So this comes in very handy for partnerships, which I'm in one as of 2 years ago. Comes in very handy for the world and the divisiveness in the world, the work Braver Angels is doing. But this is the next piece of my iteration, is how to really listen to the other guy's story and not react, but respond. And that seems like a skill the world could use a whole lot more of. I certainly can.
Wow. Do you think there might be a book in that for you?
No idea. My antenna are always out for my next marching orders.
Right.
And it may be something around this, but this is really freaking hard work. Anybody who's in a relationship knows this one intuitively. The way you fight, the arsenals you bring out when you fight, the ways you try to interrupt the other guy almost as a military move, just the ways that we fight. And what is underneath that? And what are the stories under that? And how do you get to the feelings and the needs that are under that and quit acting out the behavior? So really, and I'm as involved in world work as the next guy, but it really does start in your own backyard.
Completely. I think that is, I mean, I think what you're just talking about is nothing less than like the survival of our species. See, really, I mean, like, it does boil down to that. Like, can we listen to each other? Can we figure out how to get along? Because if not, I mean, it kind of blows my mind. Honestly, there are 7 billion plus of us. I don't know the last count. It's kind of incredible that if you think about it, that we've gotten along as well as we have, and we're all still, or those of us that are still here are still here. It's kind of a miracle.
Yeah, right. Given our propensities to break into factions and fight with one another and power up, power down, just so many versions of that. The whole diversity and inclusion thing that happened after George Floyd, especially. I've been digging into, this is my little piece of that puzzle, is what does inner diversity and inclusion look like? What are the parts of your own personality you shut out of the room because you don't want to deal with it? What are the confirmation biases you have against certain parts of your own personality?
Shadow work.
And so diversity and inclusion work is intrapsychic work, not just between people. And so I'm kind of looking at that under this big umbrella of authentic relating.
I love it because it goes all the way back to your childhood and your curiosity about what's under the surface and the internal life. So it's a good full circle. Gregg, how can people, get informed about your work? Where would you direct them?
Yeah,
all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, just get a hold of Oprah Winfrey. She knows. The world headquarters for me is just my website. So it's gregglevoy.com, 2 G's in Gregg, but pretty much best place to start with me.
Fantastic. And I certainly would encourage all listeners to check out those books, Callings and Vital Signs.
Yeah, thank you.
They're not just worth reading, they're worth rereading on a regular basis, I think, because as I was telling Gregg before we started talking, that you bring a different person with you each time you pick up these books, and there's so much in there that that new things will pop out at you, new insights, new things may appear relevant from the last time you read them. So can't recommend them highly enough. Can't thank you enough, Gregg, for speaking with me today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And all the best to you.
Yeah, thank you. And you have a wonderful natural gift for this work.
Oh, thanks so much. Wow,
you really do.
Means a lot coming from you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Eric.